Secrets of the ferns, ba-doom, secrets of the ferns, ba-doom, secrets of the ferns, ba-doom, secrets of the ferns. Secrets of the Ferns, Chapter 10, Diminished Pride. A whole hill was covered in serpents. Lions sat at the bottom, watching them. A Chinese man with a black robe approached the scene. The lions took no notice. They told the man what the serpents had told them, that he in a past life was responsible for the death of one of their greatest serpentine leaders. The man now knew his memories to be real. He spent 40 years of his life wondering, mystified at these strange recollections. He came forth and spoke to the serpents on the hill. Fangul, it's been over a century since my last visit. I know God destroyed your leader. The immortals regarded your leader as an amazing sage of wisdom and clarity. She provided counsel to the great Quetzalcoatl. She coached Odin and I on the cyclical nature of eternity. I never knew God's wrathful nature until that day when I, who was once named Daniel, was destroyed by his fire and brimstone. Buddha has taught me patience in the challenge I personally face with God. My plan is to bring back the immortals and decentralize the power of the creations department. God holds too much authority. He will go to no end in his wrath. The lions heard the snake's hiss, and soon the serpent colony slithered away on their bellies. The lions told the man that they would help any way they can and to always consult the roots of the ferns. Just like the Fangul, the serpentine colony that slithered away, the lions soon began parting ways with the man who sought counsel. So the mortal man Confucius continued providing counsel to prominent men and women and immortals, and one last time again sought out the help of the Fangul and the lions. He heard tell of a coming flood that wiped out a lot of the West. The rest of his news Confucius obtained from the ferns that grew in the forests and wetlands. The East meditated in silence. It wasn't until 3 reincarnations later, after Confucius was born into a life of a poet in what is now known as Norway, then a Mayan peasant in what is now known as Guatemala, then a fisherman in eastern Judea. He was watching a boy about 9 years younger than him walk on water. This boy later only did this at necessary times to avoid too much attention. He had heard about the flood in the past that had been apparently only survived by one family on an ark that was filled with all of God's creations. The man formerly known as Kong Ki, Kong Fuzi, Master Kong, or Confucius. He laughed at this. It paid for his security to have many names. In this life as a fisherman, his new name was Judas Iscariot. God had only created locusts and mealworms. They had minor benefits to the environment, sure. However, all the animals that were on the earth were created long before God was even an internet core. Proof that most of the other immortals of Core were still alive, Judas thought to himself. Judas watched as this young boy grew up to be a carpenter, later finding out that he was immortal and that God sent him here on a suicide mission. Not only that, but the young boy, now a young man, Jesus, was God's only son. Everyone knew that Hera had been sleeping around on Zeus, and when God was trying to think of who to send to Earth to sway more humans to monotheism, he immediately thought of Jesus. It'd get Jesus out of Zeus's radar and possibly rebrand his image. Judas remembered his life as Daniel, as Confucius, how God destroyed Daniel and how Confucius destroyed himself in a lifetime of seeming vain, seeking ferns, attempting to figure out next steps. Judas learned to love Jesus more than he ever loved any immortal he had met up until then. He did not sell Jesus to the Romans as the canonical scriptures that were written by some of the other disciples had claimed. The mortal men were easily deceived. Judas told Jesus the truth while he hung from the cross. He spoke the nature of God, his endless greed and merciless wrath, how Jesus' pretend suicide mission was God's vanity project, meant singularly for public relations. Jesus wept. When Jesus resurrected the following Sunday, he bid farewell to his disciples and headed out east to dwell with Buddha, Kali, Tengri, and the immortal known simply as Firebird. They bred reindeer, Komodo dragons, and tigers. Judas's death had to be faked. He and Jesus snuck out in the middle of the night. They used the cadaver of a recently deceased priest to stage a brutal suicide. There was one disciple who still felt uneasy with this barrage of information. He had his doubts, but Thomas loved Jesus, so he trusted his farewell words. God found out that Judas informed Jesus of everything. He sent Judas through the lake of fire where he spent his remaining 6 years, surviving in the wilderness of the alternate universe that no mortal or immortal from our universe has known to come back from. He was in a jungle, weakened by the fiery portal of space-time anomaly. His black robes were singed and full of holes. They grew ragged like Judas as he trekked through the growths and rafted down treacherous streams. His surroundings were inhabited at all times by creatures harmless and murderous, tame and savage, above him, below him, sometimes crawling on him, landing on his body. One day he found Thoth, the Green Man, and the Baba Yaga all fishing in the wide river. Judas traveled with them, explained that he had met them in many other lives, reminding them who he was. After his 6 years in this dimension, he perished. Since his death, much has changed. His body was left to rot in an alternate universe's jungle habitat. His memory was forever made infamous, a true martyr in his own cause. When Judas got thrown into the lake of fire, God thought this kept Judas's soul trapped indefinitely in stasis. That is how he believed the lake of fire worked. He read it in an article somewhere. God, formerly known as Gosh, had no clue or intuition that Judas was in an entirely different dimension. He wasn't even sure if Judas could even die there. It didn't even cross God's mind as he played in his clouds, dreaming about his new plans and ambitions. Judas reincarnated back in his home universe because the energy pathways were programmed and tuned for this specific universe. So like all mortal humans, Judas reincarnated on Earth. Ultimately, it was Satan who decided Judas's fate, not God. The bizarre news surprised Satan. His eyes glowed, his wings retracted. His cubicle got cold and even returned to normal when Judas told the business casual Satan everything he had experienced. The immortal president of the reincarnations department grew more and more shocked at God's wrath as he heard Judas's account of the lake of fire, his journey through the endless jungles and the trapped immortals. Satan looked at Judas Iscariot with serious contemplation. He remembered Judas's many cycles of reincarnations. When the man in black robes was out strolling at night, which was very frequent, he meditated in moonlight. He halfways became nocturnal. It was so he could consult with the lions and the fangul. The man in black loved to meditate, especially in the wilderness under the starry sky, milky with galactic dust. Satan admired the beauty of this poor soul, doomed with all its memories, shames, guilts, and grievances. Satan thought long and hard for his friend who he truly loved. It gave him much emotional turmoil to send his soul back to Earth who would live and die just to be sent back time and time again. Each life was Daniel. Each birth came with him. Each death carried him. And with each death, lifetime after lifetime was compiled on and on as he kept reincarnating. If only I could go back in time and save Daniel from this cursed eternal existence with ancient memory, exiled to the midnight wilderness, where he will always be doomed to be distrustful of humans, for he carries the curses of knowledge and the burdens of wisdom, Satan thought to himself. Then he made a face of reluctance when finally he snapped his fingers after deciding where on earth Judas would go and who he would be. It was an odd placement. Satan was well aware, but the place was very appropriate for a man with Judas's capabilities. He was born into a seemingly futile life. He grew to be a man known as Pliny the Younger. Pliny had all the memories of the lives of Daniel, Confucius, Judas, and all the lives in between. He witnessed the death of his dear uncle who died breathing hot toxic gases while on a rescue mission. It was right after the deadly eruption of Mount Vesuvius that left the citizens of Pompeii immortalized by calcified volcanic ash. Pliny the Younger saw the extinction of lions in Greece. A gifted lawyer, author, and magistrate of Rome, Pliny the Younger was investigating God's cohorts through lioness spies. He was extremely good at it. He lost sight of his vulnerability to God's wrath, and God sent a message to all the temples who worshipped him to convince all the village's leaders and temples of all cults to slay the lions. Humans had already crowded that part of the world, killing off larger wild game. God's team only cheered the inevitable disappearance of lions over time. Very little of their prides remain in the world. Pliny the Younger was very careful about his choice of words when speaking to authorities about Christians. He pretended to follow a protocol of executing Christians to appease the Roman Emperor Trajan. It was complicated because Pliny had to pretend that he was carrying out executions for the emperor's approval, but at the same time, he had observed Christians and their beliefs and talked favorably of them for the most part. The emperor did indeed oversee thousands of these executions, but gave orders that decreased this gruesome Roman pastime. Pliny the Younger was a mortal man and had very little power despite his influence. As natural for any human, Pliny felt extreme hatred and anger over how his life had gone and grieved with fury over the rapid decline of lions. The moonlight was his only sanctuary. One night, as Pliny the Younger was attending a conference for he had become the governor of Bithynia Pontus. Stepping out for his nightly stroll and meditation, he was overthrown with passion over the affairs of men, Rome, and God. His memories of the trapped immortals haunted him every hour. The conference continued the next day as the governor, who was seen the evening before in his long black toga, was nowhere to be found. Pliny's wife stopped receiving letters from him. He never returned to Italy. His death was as sudden as it was mysterious. There was still a long road ahead as the man in black kept reincarnating and being reborn into a world as a baby, only to find out in each life as he grew up all the progress God had made gradually through the centuries. The mortal man with an immortal memory had no choice but to remember the immortals trapped in a foreign dimension on the other side of that wormhole past the entrance of that so-called lake of fire. He remembered too much for one mortal man. It was his curse and burden. He hungered for peace with each life, surrendering several battles to choose more noble quests. He persevered with fastidious precision, wary caution, and circumspect vigilance. He pursued the arts more and more in each life, writing in almost all of them. More and more he moved forward through the centuries. It was the only way that the achromatically dressed mortal could process his thoughts. The mortal who had experienced several traumas, birth and death, held so much feeling accompanied by a neuroticism. It was filled with overwhelming information and knowledge and an unconscionably exorbitant amount of memories and experiences for one man. The man in black began to understand the underlying nature of the immortals, their seemingly quirky ways guided by heartbreak and the executive hesitancy guided by wistful wisdom that knew no end. No end. Will it ever end? He wondered. He didn't have to think those daunting words. He felt them, for the vehement emotion was etched in his soul. He could not sit with his longing to forget everything in his next life, his longing to die and never be reborn, to fade into nothing, never again to exist on any plane, in any dimension, in any body. He could not sit with this longing, no. It sat in his chest, life after life. He reluctantly faced this inner shadow and what was becoming an integral part of his whole being. Writing and art led him to embrace his pseudo-mortality. All he wanted to do, after all, was make a difference in the world of gods and men with creations. Through these memories of beings like Jesus and Lucifer and Odin, Thoth, Hermes, and Anansi, he nourished his hunger for inner peace in the ways that he discovered to be passively satisfactory. This satiated hunger for peace soothed the tumultuous acid of ambition that bubbled and gurgled inside of his stomach. It was the ambition of ambitions, that hubris of all beings, gods and men alike, the burning proclivity to create.